All right. Well, good morning, Greg. After a good week of you kind of running around Gunnison with
All
family
over
for last
Colorado,
week,
actually. Yeah, yeah,
the timing was great. So yeah, I know you're kind of coming back from that break,
yeah,
and then I had some other big stuff that we're working on, which is good. So and then
yeah.
I get my break here soon because we're going to be
Very
on
soon.
baby watch pretty soon. So
Exactly.
so that'll be good. But today we're gonna talk about something that we've discussed elements of sort of before in
Yeah,
different episodes. But we're talking a little bit about language and how it's used, specifically around some terms that I know you turn into the what really grinds my gears kind of
I
episode.
really
But
do.
but it
Almost
is
immediately.
but when it comes to things like people talk about, situational awareness and I use that term in general and hey, you got to pay attention. And I think it's important to start out saying when people are doing this, obviously they're well intentioned.
Yep.
They're typically telling people to be safe and all this stuff, but a lot of this stuff gets used incorrectly, and I think it gives a false understanding of it. Then, I mean, these terms mean something, not just those, but others, which even to the point where I'm like, I don't ever use that term because I don't like it because I don't know what it means to you. When someone talks about situation or situational awareness, that was a term a lot of pilots use a lot because you have to maintain
Yeah.
situational awareness to know literally where the horizon is and you don't come burning into the ground. You can flip around. If you work in like an operations center, you're
Yep.
in something like that you have to you want to have situational awareness about what's going on in your area of operations. And then there's this one now everyone's using of you, I guess, just being aware of your surroundings and keeping your head on a swivel, as they say. But
Yeah.
it's important, to kind of understand what this in the context of what we talk about critical thinking and pattern recognition and human behavior, because you don't just want to slap a sticker on something. It's the guarantee on the box, you know what I mean, from Tommy Boy, right?
That's
Well, there
so
it is.
so
I
good.
can I can
Right.
point to the guarantee, you know. But I'll throw to you, Greg, to kind of get into it and define some of these terms. And again, we'll preface it now, but someone will still get butthurt.
Yep.
That hey, a lot of people well-intentioned, just like a lot of training stuff we see. It's not that it's bad training. It's just it's not going to give you the outcomes you think it's going to, and you only have
Exactly.
so much time to do so much of it. So you need to pick accordingly on what's the most advantageous to use. But I'll sort of stop there and let you kind of kick it off with some of the terms and what we mean by them and what they
Yeah.
actually mean.
I appreciate that, and I went a different way just now because I'm writing
Perfect.
these things
Thank
down because
thank
you
you.
you know you're welcome, but you anger me all the time.
You anger
you
yourself.
I do. And that's what happened is what you just lit the fuse.
So
So
sometimes I go in there,
uh,
I'll flip the
here's
switch, but
here's the yeah you did, and all you did is step on a scale. So here's three things before I give those definitions that made me think. I wrote down OODA loop, okay, because if I hear one more misappropriation, I wrote down imposter syndrome and Dunning Kruger. So here's the thing, folks: your knowledge, your background, experience, and those things that you intuit or gut instinct all lead you to make the decisions that you make in your life. You don't need to adopt somebody else's under uh, experienced or researched term to name it. So the idea is that every generation comes up with these terms to throw out there and name it, and it
yeah.
has nothing to do with your daily life, mowing your lawn, making your dinner, taking your kids to school. So abandon it. So anytime that you're about to enter a situation that has danger and opportunity, your brain relies on a decision making process that already includes pattern recognition, pattern matching,
Yeah.
relevant analysis that helps you form likely storylines on what's happening right now. And then based on the artifacts and evidence and your experience and knowledge, what's going to happen in just a few seconds. And if that outcome is dangerous, your brain and body have a system already made up. The decision is made in the amygdala, and then you act on it for fight or flight or fear, or a number of other things that I'm sure your next book by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman will talk about. The idea is that if we then combine that with opportunity, meaning that the danger demonstrates now that it's more likely to be an opportunity to get anything on the 4Fs or whatever scale that your brain is operating on, then your brain already has an opportunity and a situation and a rehearsal ready to avail yourself of that. Now, sometimes it goes really fast. Some people are very experienced with it. Some people will never sense the danger cue and die. Why do I mean that? So the best decision possible means you have to predict likely outcomes. Without that, it's worthless. So what's the difference between, for example, situation awareness and situational awareness? So you just said it perfectly, and any definition I get will pale in comparison to a pilot that's flying. Now they're in a fight, a dog fight, and they begin to shoot. And what happens is they lose their situation awareness of their surroundings and where the horizon is, and they burn to the ground. And it happens a lot.
It still happens,
meaning it happens so much that it's significant, and every war has them, and you can go and look up on your own.
Even training and stuff like that. Yes. I mean, that's a big thing. Yeah.
So situation understanding means that you have constructed and you understand a fidelity filled baseline, and that the elements that make it unique can change. Weather, time, light, and how those change with respect to, for example, time, or another relevant factor. I was watching one person in my baseline, now there's three. So that's situation awareness, being aware that there is a situation, the situation is in progress, and you're part of it. And so what's the difference between situational awareness? Those two letters to me mean everything. Yeah. And we've had this discussion for years, right? Because most people don't get it. My thing is situational understanding is what situational awareness is, not paying attention. That's not the same thing. You get where I'm going there?
Yeah, and real quick, because these are, great definitions and explanations, and I like where you're going, but like, why do I need to know this? Like, why do I need to know? You know what I mean?
Right. So that's
what does this matter? I mean, are we just having a semantic argument at this point?
No. Okay. So your brain has to have a fidelity-filled baseline based on your intent. So that's externally directed consciousness is directed at something. So, for example, situation awareness means understanding that you're going to drive a car today, and you're going to go get fuel and grab a USA Today and a burger and go back to your house. There's not a lot of thought process that's going on with that. But now you've changed, and you say, this morning, I'm going to go and apply for a job. So how do I want to dress? What's my route selection? When do I want to be there? Do I want to smell like Listerine because it kind of smells like I'm covered in alcohol?
Versus running the store.
So what happens is now, Brian, that adaptive knowledge starts coming in. So it's not just about my baseline and danger and opportunity. Now it's about route selection. Now it's about temporal issues. Now it's about how I look to another person and what I want to say. So those processes are what makes it different. So the three big ones are, I have to gather the data from the situation or the situation I'm expecting to encounter. I have to therefore make decisions, and a lot more decisions than just saying, hey, I'm going to get on the bus and head to work, right? And then there's always the guiding the action that I want, the outcome that I'm expecting. Completely different, because that means we have to predict the future. You get it? The difference between us and like when somebody says pay attention doesn't mean shit when you're trying to predict a likely outcome or predict a future.
It doesn't help. So what you're talking about, and you're just explaining an intuitive process that all humans do, and we're not even aware of sometimes. And sometimes what we're talking about is even sort of becoming consciously aware of this stuff.
Exactly.
That in and of itself will get you better at it, right? Being
it's huge. What have I done? It's huge, right?
Just knowing what you've done successfully to get to work on time every day. You go, oh wow, I naturally adapt to the environment. I saw that there was going to be construction coming up, so I chose a different route that morning. Knowing that, and it worked. Like, and we're using these very simple examples because this is how your brain does it, and it does the same. So it does the same thing in when you talk about the danger, opportunity, or a chaotic environment or something else. And if I don't always have something there is the problem. But
no. So let me give you a comparison, right?
In order to be that, to mitigate stuff and what you're talking about, and to understand pattern recognition, I have to understand it in the most basic elemental form before I can do it and see the attack.
Which speaks to your argument about language. Yeah. Which speaks to your argument about language. If we convolute the issue with a bunch of senseless, meandering SQ obfuscation, then we're not getting to the point. So I'll give you an example. Back in 1980, I was railing against the mobile data terminal. We had two things, a KDT and an MDT that just came out. So the KDT was about the size of a longer version of the phone that I carry. And what you could do is run basic things, like you could run a 2829. You could run a person's name and their date of birth for warrants. Now, that was helpful on the street. But what it did is it took your attention away from the task at hand. And it also took your visual field away, because now you had to look down, and it took an added cognitive load because now I got to enter stuff. And then every cop I saw using an MDT, the mobile data terminal, that little computer in their car, which is much smaller now. Back then, you can imagine how big it was, because every cop that was using it was looking down. So I warned in training over and over and railed against people using it because it was going to take your attention away. So don't use it on a traffic stop. Use it before or after, because you're not going to pay attention. And we had a cop named Anderson. I won't go into any greater detail than that. And while he walked back from running the information on his MDT, the guy in the car got out, unbeknownst to him, walked all the way back and stuck his gun in the window and fired a bunch of shots into his brain. Now, the idea, Brian, is that we say the MDT will increase your situational awareness, but look down at it. We tell pilots that all the gauges on your airplane are going to help you make decisions. But where are you looking? You're looking at the gauges, and guess where they're not looking? They're not looking out the window. So I'm saying that that balance of technology actually can make us dumber, right?
Yes.
And the principal underpinnings of what we talk about all the time is making better decisions based on comparisons. So human behavior pattern recognition is intrinsically necessary to make better decisions under extremis conditions, under extreme conditions, under stress, meaning that it doesn't matter if it's danger or opportunity. The more I know, the better decision I make, the further I am. I take a knee behind cover. All of those things are good. Why? Because I can run faster than you and get to the situation of danger or opportunity quicker, but that's not always the right task. That's not always the right way. So those people die. Then some people linger and look out the window, Brian, and those people never get there and they die. So there's that sweet spot of decision making, and it's not paying attention. So let's disabuse that paying attention means attending to a thing, your environment, a task. And that's fine. But Brian, it's a completely different part of your brain that sense makes and predicts the future and says these are the likely outcomes.
That's the part. It's this so what? I mean,
Yes.
meaning okay, you're going to go constantly scan your environment for what? Why? Where are you at? What are
Exactly.
you doing? Because like if you don't have a reason or you don't have a clear intent, then you're gonna miss what you think you're looking for. I think. You know what I mean?
Precisely.
If I'm doing that because
everything in your environment's not equally weighted. That's what you
right.
just said in street terms. So go a little deeper. Tell me what I mean by that.
So you know, if I'm on a protective detail, right,
Right.
I'm there looking for a specific bandwidth of behavior. Now, I have to open that up sometimes when we tell people in order to see, you know, maybe prevent indications of violence, but I'm looking for certain elements in my environment based on my role. Well, that was very
Yep.
different. You know, yesterday we went down to a friend's, had like a little it's sort of a baby shower, but it was where everyone was invited, and it was down in San Diego at Liberty Station, beautiful area. And but it's Sunday, it's busy, so I'm looking for the right place to park based
Yep.
on the interaction of vehicles coming and going. Are those vehicles pulling out of that lot, or did they just drive through that lot looking for a parking space? And I know there's no, so I can bypass that one. It's
Yep.
just a very different intent behind it, but the underpinning, you know, the fundamental process is the same, and I can draw on my experience from any of those different environments to come up with a better decision. Should I sit here in this line longer or jump over there, or is everyone already doing that? So I'm going to have actually more advantageous to go up to this. Like it's like the grocery store line, right? Is
Exactly.
that line shorter, but their carts are completely full? That line's longer, but they don't have as much stuff, but it takes a while to process this.
Yep.
Which one is a better actual take? Well, sometimes actually with those big, heavy, full carts, it's actually better to get behind them because there's only one person in that line, where these three, it's just your brain's constantly doing that to calculate more efficient path to save you some time and
Exactly.
calories.
So you're exactly right. And let's say this. When I was building Combat Hunter, there was a lot of pushback. And the pushback was because I would show photos from my hometown city market, and there was a Red Bull in the spaghetti sauce aisle where somebody had been grazing. That's, folks, when you don't pay for something, you eat it in the store and just set it on a counter. I would take that photo and I would use it when we were trying to find VBIDs or snipers or any other type of damage. And the Marines around me would go like, our Marines aren't going to understand that. You've got to put a bomb in there and put them in the environment. And I'm like, no, your Marines will understand this more, because every one of them is shopped with mom or dad, and they had to learn how to shop on their own. And they understand that Red Bull doesn't fit on the gosh damn Progresso or Prego shelf. And the idea is your brain is much smarter than you give it credit for.
Yes.
And your brain pattern recognizes early and says, this pattern doesn't fit. This is where you come in as a human in the loop. You have to therefore say it means danger or not. So the Red Bull on the shelf doesn't mean danger in this situation, nor did the car that already decided that they were going to use the parking space, so you might as well not stick around. But the same reasoning your brain used works to find a vehicle-borne sniper or a vehicle-borne IED in combat. Why? Because what would that person do, Brian? They would do the same thing. They would search around. They're doing a little recon for the vehicle. The difference is they would want a key parking spot close to the front of the mosque or whatever, right? So the idea is, who fine-tunes information? You do. And how do you do that? You do that with fidelity-filled baselines and great mental file folders, because that accumulation of knowledge over time is what makes you smarter and more canny than the opponent or the terrorist.
Yes, but then what influences that decision making is our biases, our biases of the things we've learned, that we have a bias towards certain elements based on our past experience, and our bias towards that, and our bias towards not wanting to, our brain just not wanting to expend too many calories. And so that influences the decision making significantly, obviously.
Precisely, and adds to your cognitive load. So let's talk about that very briefly, Brian. When you complicate life by adding OODA loop and adding Dunning-Kruger and adding imposter syndrome, what you're doing is you're adding a layer. Hold on. This is the argument for Left of Bang. What happened is, two of my students that wrote Left of Bang sat in the class and they said, this is great. And instead of deconstructing, I've spent my entire life speeding up. They tried to put things back on the shelf.
And they missed. They would, if you know, then
hopelessly missed the point. Right. So the point is, Brian, that going back to your original argument about language, I can only do a certain number of things. The cognitive load means the part of my short-term memory, which we call working memory now, that I can use that amount of energy and effort to recall and compare, and it has limits. So if I'm tied up, like you know me all the time when I try to speak Spanish, I have a cognitive load and there's a bias. Okay. In other words, I don't need to name the bias, the Spanish language bias. It's on board anyway, right?
Yeah, it's there.
And what happens is, I look at you and I'm going down through all the verbs and the action words and everything else. And by the time the waitress has left the table, and I go, fuck, there was my opportunity to use my Spanish. Well, what happens is I've created, and remember, we're talking about this in terms of cognitive psychology, not like engineering and mathematics. Okay. My working memory and my recall is reduced because I put pressure on myself in that situation to say it exactly right. Instead of just whipping it out and saying gracias, I was sitting there and I missed the opportunity. You get it? So danger and opportunity are based on cognitive load as well, because my brain has a bias against heavy cognitive load. In other words, I'm more likely to make a mistake when my cognitive load is heavier. And therefore, every time that I try to name more shit and add those little knickknacks on my cabinet, it takes further dusting in the future. And I don't have time for that dusting.
And can you sort of define what you mean by cognitive load for everyone? Because that's how it's measured, especially, especially in performance, right?
I apologize. And I go too fast sometimes when I get animated. But the idea is this. You have short-term memory and long-term memory. Short-term memory is your working memory, those things that are available to you in the moment. And so cognitive load literally refers to the amount of working memory resources that you have available for use right now, that you're using at this moment. So the amount of effort that's exerted or required while you're thinking, while you're reasoning, while you're making those decisions. And every mental process, memory, perception, language, they all create a cognitive load.
Right.
Well, if you think of those as buckets of water and you're putting them on a board that's on a piece of scaffolding and you're about to raise it up to a painter that's working on a house, for example, if I exceed the cognitive load of that pallet, Brian, of that lifting mechanism of that scaffolding, it's going to crash down and it's probably going to kill the person that's on the scaffold. So we understand too that the reason that we beat home every day, you guys, when we're talking about those of you listening, about an expert model, experts have more knowledge, more experience, and therefore the cognitive load is lower for them because they can go to their long-term stored memory file folder rather than their working memory to make those decisions.
Right. You know, well, and like you said, experience, training, influence that stuff, the situation heavily. You know, if the star, you know, you're Tom Brady in the in the Super Bowl, well, look, man, like you've been there before. You've been doing this a
Exactly.
while, all right? But if he gets injured and it's the new guy, it's his first season and the
Yep.
NFL gets called up, that's going to be a different experience for him out there,
So,
right?
but add this too. You said a couple episodes ago we were talking about flashbangs, and I will tell you this: going into a room and having somebody throw a flashbang at different times into that room when you're not expecting it will not reduce your cognitive load.
No.
It'll just make you say, "I don't want to go in that gosh damn room."
Well,
So, so
it'll
the
make you,
difference.
yeah, it's a sensory adaptation,
Oh yeah,
not
of
not a not
course,
a not a cognitive, a
of
load
course.
adaptation. It's
but
just
you're but
I'm
you're
not as
going to add a
startled
new
by it.
bias. No, but you're
Right.
going to add a new bias. You're going to have a flinch reflex when somebody throws a beer can or a smoke grenade rather than a
Yes.
flashbang. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So your body now has to assimilate new information, and somebody's going to say that's good training, and we would argue it's not. We would argue that the training
It
reduces the cognitive load. Therefore, experiential, knowledge-based training for a novice is going to allow that novice to carry a heavier cognitive load. It's literally that simple in our mantra.
Yeah, and what and that's why with what we're talking about too is kind of a little bit different and than some of those situations in terms of you're building in repetitions
Yeah.
for a conditioned response, and you can continually overwhelm someone so they get better and faster at that conditioned response. But that's it though. That is a response to a
And it
stimulus.
may be a companion skill. It may be something that's
Right,
essential
but
for that
but like you
mission,
said, it
let's say.
goes back to it's that's not helping you think through a situation or make better decisions.
Precise.
And I do want to hit on something because you brought up some of the terms that I see thrown around a lot today. And again,
Yeah.
I, I get it and I understand why people, come up with these terms like the imposter syndrome one or
Yes.
all these different ones. I get it. You're trying to name something that the problem is they get used incorrectly and what everything is now today
And
is
they've been
like
named before.
yeah, and everything is like
Exactly.
WebMD right now where everyone just goes, "Oh, I have that. I have that
I
imposter
have Lyme
syndrome.
disease, by the way, Brian.
I have ADHD. I have
Yep.
this just because, I've seen one person, she was describing her like, oh my God, I had horrible ADHD. I was unloading the dishwasher and I kept thinking about all this. And I'm like, you just described consciousness. Like, congratulations, you
Being
have
there. Right.
consciousness. Like your brain is thinking. That's what it's supposed to be doing. It's like, so these things get that messed around, and I don't think they always they get hijacked a lot of times too. And they've all been around before. I mean, my favorite one and two is when
That's the
people
key.
talk about
So
when people talk about like the flow state, I was like, congratulations, you learn to focus on one thing at a time. Isn't it
right.
amazing how powerful your brain is when you're working on one single thing and centrally focused on it? You have a lot of energy towards it. You're just not used to doing that, especially today with the more
Exactly.
distracted, more cell phones and all that stuff, right? You become more distracted. So you're training yourself because your phone is a teacher, right? It's not a phone anymore, it's a teacher.
Absolutely.
And so you're training yourself to become more distracted. And it's like, remember where Collier used to do he'd walk right in front of a group of Marines and he didn't have any, he wanted a bum a dip. So he just with his hands, he didn't have any. So if everyone knows, like, I'm making the noise, sort of like move my hand like I'm packing a can of dip. And then sure enough, some Marine or soldier or whatever would tap on
Yep.
wherever their can of Copenhagen was in their pocket, right? Because there's a conditioned response for that Marine.
Yep.
And he could walk up and be like, hey, brother, mind if I get a pinch real quick? Now, the idea, it's the same thing with a phone. Like if you hear a phone vibrate on a table, everyone goes, "Oh, I should probably check my messages."
Check in mind.
So
Right.
if you're having that response, like you've gone too far. Like you need to
Right.
unlearn that.
So
But it's a good way to describe what we're talking about because all it is
yep.
are we creating critical thinking, situations, or are we just training a response? Because you can't train a
Exactly.
response for every situation you're in. It's not
So
possible.
what Brian just described in great detail, and it was wonderful street level stuff that you can use in your own class, is Brian said, "Hey, I'm attending to things in my environment.
Hmm.
Attending to things in my environment are different than critical thinking and certainly advanced critical thinking and predicting outcomes." Okay, because you're not predicting an outcome when the phone rings and you answer it. That's attending to something. But prediction would be to, holy shit, I wonder if that's the clinic calling for my very important test result, right? That's a different skill that you have. And you would base that knowledge on the time of day. Had you made a previous call? Do you see there's a bunch of different things that go in to paying attention that are very different from making conscious decisions. So
Right.
Greg Prim the other day on LinkedIn was talking about how important B plus A equals D is. So I want to ask you a very simple question, folks. Do you think that 3,000 years ago on the steps of the Parthenon that they didn't understand what a Dunning-Kruger was, that they needed two extra
Yeah.
names, or they didn't understand the imposter syndrome. It's all been discussed before, and people over time have named it, and they fall in or out of favor. So I'm saying disabuse yourself of the clinical definition and go to the street. So focused attention, for example, is where baseline plus plus anomaly comes from, because you can't make a decision in that quickly without understanding how to categorize stimuli. Because in every new environment, in every environment you walk into, you have to do B plus A equals D. So if somebody hasn't taught you how to weight objects in that scenario, in that mental exercise, then you're going to be at a deficit, because, Brian, what you're going to be doing is attending to things in the environment. You're going to attend them left to right if you're born in America, and you're going to go way slow. There's a car, it's parked. There's a car, it's parked. There's a dog, he's on a
Yeah.
leash. You understand
Right.
what I mean? And so
Right.
by the time you get to the guy that's walking up on you with the hatchet or the baseball bat, you're going to lose. And you're going to say, well, I would notice that first. No, you won't. You won't notice things unless you categorize things in your brain and you stage accurate rehearsals. That's called training. Education doesn't get you there. Reading
Right.
a book doesn't imbue those skills upon you that are talked about in that book. And we have to stop the over-reliance on understanding. And look, I know it's semantic gymnastics. I know we're throwing words out, but every time I hear somebody increase your situational awareness, I go like you do. Why? For what reason? What are you doing it for? What do you expect the outcome is? Because the word alone can't be thrown out there, nor can the word attention. Improve, pay more attention. You can pay more
Yeah.
attention,
You
but now
can't.
you're pushing against your cognitive load, and you're going to be dumber.
What do you do? Well, that's when you get into, obviously you get into, hypervigilance, which
Yep,
becomes a negative feedback loop. And the longer you do that, the less
precisely.
likely you are to ever see anything, because you're constantly, you
So,
just,
so what's the importance of a feedback loop in decision science? The feedback loop allows me to take my pulse in the moment to determine if the results that I deemed achievable going into the experiment are still achievable. Because if not, then it's a zero-sum
well,
game. If
and,
not, then it's untenable,
and
right?
so you brought it up, in the moment, and that's obviously the most important part. That's what we're talking
Right.
about, right? And so it's hard to do that if I haven't done that in some sort of training environment, meaning,
Precisely.
I can't reflect on what I'm doing while I'm doing it. I have to do it, you know what I mean? Then
Yep.
reflect on it and go, oh, okay.
So
But,
let's change the word training for a minute. That we're talking
well,
about
I,
language. Let's trade training for those sentences. Training now becomes experimentation. What
yes. And
is the
that's,
training environment?
well,
It's the
that's the
experiment
idea
environment,
is,
the lab.
and I use, training in the most, general sense, because what you're doing anytime you create a new process, or come up with
Right.
a way to do something, I don't care if it's your morning routine or whatever, that's a training program. You
It's
didn't you didn't write it
absolutely
down and go and come up with ELOs and TLOs and time, like, no, but that's what you did. That's a program
But if you
you came up
unpacked it,
with.
they were there.
That
They're
it's
really
all
there.
the elements
Yes.
are likely already there. And if
Yes.
you've done it for something successful, what were those elements? And kind of what we're talking about is actually, I got a I was reading another, I don't know if you know, John Dewey. He's the old
Yeah.
psychologist, and yeah, so guy and philosopher, which normally my favorite philosophers are all physicists because they have a fundamental understanding. But this guy really understood education. It's been kind of read some of his stuff recently too, going back into, because I got the boy on the way, like developmental psychology
Yep.
stuff, and really thinking about, for kids and learning
Doing it
how
right
to
right
develop. You know
away.
what I mean? Well,
Yeah.
but the idea is, what I was, he's hit this guy John Dewey. He can write. He can put more in a paragraph than most people put in an entire fucking book, and you
Right.
have to sit there and unpack it. But what he said was that what I really liked was, the most important factor in the training of good mental habits consists in acquiring the attitude of suspended conclusion, and in mastering the various methods of searching for new materials to corroborate or refute the
Yep.
first suggestions that occur. So that's kind of
Yep.
almost like an careful, you have biases, right?
And,
And
and,
then,
and a feedback loop, right?
right. And then he said,
Continuously measure, right?
and that's it. And then he's just said to maintain the state of doubt and to carry on systematic and protracted inquiry. These are the essentials of thinking. So what he was talking about
Yep.
was cognition, right? And he brought it
Yep.
down there like, you
Thinking
have to,
about thinking.
and
Exactly.
having a suspended conclusion. Like, I don't know where this is going to go. What elements are here that would prove or deny my different hypotheses? And we talk about this stuff all the time, but
We
like you
do.
just gave the example too right off the bat of the parking lot, or walking up and seeing something. It's
Yep.
like we're constantly doing that. And if I'm not aware of the fact that my brain will just jam answers in before I get to the before I even get to the, I'm only at option A, and before I get to
Yes.
D, because there's 4 or 5 options there, my brain already says,
That's
don't
the
worry, it's
danger of
C.
biases. And because you've done it before. Let's say you're a cop or a paramedic or anything else,
Yeah.
because your brain will go there to say, would you like option A? Because option A is a lot less calories. And if you don't understand that there's an option B or a C, you'll continue to choose A, and A may be problematic. So you're reading a book about physics and philosophy by Heisenberg.
Heisenberg.
And Heisenberg's quote, what we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. This goes right back to our feral cat argument, Brian. Look, we tell people to pay attention to feral cats in their environment. Why? Because it keeps you primed for new and incoming information, which means it keeps you moving, looking, thinking for a new environment to create a granularity-filled baseline.
And I love the feral cat one, because that's when we say, hey, you're going out today. I want you to try and find as many feral cats as you can.
Yes.
And what else it's doing? It's giving you something active to look at. It doesn't matter what it is. It's giving you some active thing to find in your environment. Plus, you have to look at, all right, well, where would a cat be? Does a cat just kind of strut down the middle of the road? No, it hides in negative space. It goes over areas where other people don't. Well,
you're learning so much more.
Does that? Who else does that? You know what I mean? So
why do we call him a cat burglar, Brian?
Exactly.
It's not because they stole cats, but the idea is Schrodinger threw out what Buddy Ebsen threw out. Buddy Ebsen used to have when he was really old, and I'm trying to think of the show. There used to be Thursday night was the best night of TV, and you could have Macmillan and Wife or Mannix or Cannon or all these old shows from the 70s. And Buddy Ebsen had one that was on there too. And Buddy Ebsen was the first person that talked to me about pocket lint. Hey, the stuff that's in a pocket is more important. Brian, this was in the 70s on a cop TV show for a half an hour, right? The idea is, how do you know about Schrodinger's cat? Well, you can read about it, or you can open the box. So what we do is, instead of sitting there and being disabled by hypothesis testing, we open the box and take a peek. So that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that in your environment. So what Heisenberg and Every Dewey, for example, was trying to say is that every time that you're not a fly on the wall, you're impacting the experiment outcomes. And the idea is that if you ask the wrong questions, this is my argument.
Well,
we're in a company right now. We have a strategic partnership with a company that has access to huge data. But if you ask the same old questions to the data, you're going to get the same old answers. You got to say, what is this data trying to tell me? That's what we do in baseline plus anomaly equals decision, is we're saying, what are these anomalies doing? Are they normal anomalies because of the time of day and the weather, and I'm just not experienced enough to add them or subtract them from my baseline? Or are they the compelling situational change, that atmospheric shift that I need to look for? And the only way that we learn that is training and rehearsal.
And the thing is, and then everyone gets frustrated, or some people get frustrated with us sometimes, or everyone just wants the simple. And you see a lot of people throwing out simple stuff. Oh, just do these 3 things, or follow these 10 steps, learn these things, and that's fucking junk, because
it's junk, and it's always been junk.
But the point isn't to give you the answer; it's to ask the right question, because that goes back to Heisenberg. He literally even said, figuring out the right questions to ask will get you halfway to the solution. Just doing that, and as long as you're there, you're ahead of the game. And sometimes asking those questions in the moment is what it is. If this is what I think it is, what else should I see? If it's not, what else?
Hypothesis testing.
That's it.
That's creating an explanatory storyline, making measurements and assessments. But Brian, as much as I like to say that I invented it, the shit's been around since the dawn of man.
Well, that's why we throw back to the Greeks. I mean,
exactly.
It was there before them. They just were kind of the first to start naming some of it,
Precisely. And the idea,
or at least their language stuck around long enough for people to read. You know what I mean?
And steal it.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So the idea is, I think, essential nature of our argument is that you can't quickly detect the relevant unless you weight it. So you have, and weight, W-E-I-G-H-T.
Yeah.
So weighting an anomaly is essential. When you were looking for a parking spot, you didn't weight that anomaly any more than this was an advantageous parking spot to go into this event.
Yep.
Had you gone further based on your experience and said, this may, the person may park there because they want to shoot or blow up something, and if I turn on the red and blues, they may flee from me. So what's my pursuit here? Should I call in additional units? That's where
should I wait till we turn the corner? Yeah,
precisely. So those things are what you get from the benefit of hanging around with sage gray beards or gray hairs, men or women in your environment that know things, and that's called training. And we want to take knowledge, skills, attitudes, aptitudes, ability, and we want to transfer them. Now, can you do that in a book? Yeah. Remsburg. Remsburg was great at writing stuff in books, but then what did I have to do? I had to go out and take my Kel light and my stream light and roll them in an arc to see if they illuminated other people in the room. Everybody that's read Remsburg knows exactly the experiment I'm talking about. So when Schrodinger was talking about the cat, he didn't have a box, he didn't have a cat. The experiment was your thinking through which of these relevant things may have impacted it, and what does that knowledge help me do? So Schrodinger was slapping you, giving you the B slap of reality, asking you to think your way through a situation. Well, Brian, I can't think my way through a situation if I haven't experienced it in some manner. Reading is not enough. Webinar is not enough. In-person training, why? I know a person that's very important, and they said, I've learned more about networking and people and their net worth in 15 minutes at a coffee shop, meeting the person in person, than I have the 3 years that we Zoomed and teamed together. Why? Because in human interaction, Brian, that weight of danger or opportunity is right there. Why? Because all of your synapses are firing, all of your sense-making hardware is working, and you're actually in the moment. That's why Brian, we go right back to the argument of calling it a IED lane or a Domino's pizza lane.
Right.
Yeah? Okay.
You make it the Domino's pizza lane because they'll find the IED while they're looking for the pizza.
So when that guy was in the Church's Fried Chicken or whatever thing, and he was acting up in front of the line, everybody behind him in line should have said, he's the IED. I'm now in an IED lane, and I have to take these factors and mitigate it because he's going to start shooting. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the greatest advancement in your brain is the ability to take a situation today and compare it against elements and predict the future. And people say, well, you can't predict it with great certainty. I can predict it with danger or opportunity. Those are two certainties that'll save my life, right?
You certainly can within defined contexts.
Yes.
You can.
And the construct that we've developed, meaning that you're going to take cover or run or fight or shoot.
There's certain rules that apply even at a macro level. If you could look at an economist, they'll tell you like, well, if this happens, you're going to see these three things in some.
That's why Kahneman was so brilliant.
Well, people forget he was an economist. This is for. It was for economics. It was not for.
People are holding it up and they're saying, here's the best book that's ever written. Now, that just shows that Kahneman had an insight into what he does. He is adept and an experienced.
But that's a great question, or that's a great example of what you're talking about, where he came up with there's two different types of thinking, and there's this, which is a great way to explain a certain mental process. But he was talking about economy, or he was an economist, literally talking about this is how humans kind of scale make decisions, but it's not. It's not binary. It's a way to describe certain processes. So it's almost like when some of the stuff happens, it's not necessarily the researcher or the material that comes out that's bad. It's everyone takes it and goes, oh, so you mean this? And it's like, well, hang on, no.
Yes.
So that kind of
that's a bias.
Or we come into this very simple. Oh, well, look at what this person did. It's all great. We take from all of this stuff because there's certain elements of that will last and will stand up over time. But you know what's going to happen after a while? Some of that's going to go away. And that's why every new thing or new term that comes out, like everyone wants to use, oh, it's this, it's that. It's like, I get that this is a shiny object, but so is phrenology. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And at its time, people lined up to have the bumps on their head.
Fucking head bumps red,
and that would tell your future. And I apologize. This is the phrenology clinic calling right now, and absolutely
the chief phrenologist.
The chief phrenologist.
My new title at our company.
Why not? I put it on a badge of honor. So, but let's get to the essence of what you're saying.
Yeah.
Look, everything has limits. So the amount of things I can attend to in my environment have limits.
Yes.
My ability to focus my attention or concentrate on something has its limits. So why is therefore B plus A equals D so important? Because it's a simple way to remember that you have to feedback loop everything that you're seeing, and you have to weigh things differently based on the likelihood that that thing is going to achieve your goals, which are stay alive or get laid or go to the mall, and this guy, I'm hitchhiking, might pick me up, right? I had a great conversation with somebody that was working in an area, and I won't tell you exactly where the area is, but it's on a border. And that person said, just for that moment, I saw that hitchhiker and I was like, wow, I've been in that situation before, and I pulled over. And I immediately knew within the first mile that I had made a bad decision. Okay, why? because things like compassion, things like human emotion,
Yeah.
things like the weather or the time of day influence our decision making. So what does good training do, Brian? It allows us a laboratory environment to test our hypotheses and skin
Right.
our knees so we don't bleed on the
And
street. We
and
can
you
hurt ourselves on the mat.
so you brought up something kind of a couple times I want to hit on because you talk about,
Sure.
weighing things,
Yeah.
observations or whatever it is. And my thing is because you brought up a couple. You said, B plus A equals D, a simple algorithm. It's not unlike, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Well,
Which
that's
fits any
but
environment.
that
Right,
and
right,
that,
right.
that's algebra, which is what,
Yep.
Chat GPT and these large language models are. But the reason why I'm bringing that up is that it if I'm A squared plus B squared equals C squared always works. And it's that algorithm will always give me C squared, will always give me the answer. Here's the problem.
Yep.
I'm the one putting in the values for A squared and B squared. So if
Yep.
those are fucked up, I'm gonna get a
If your
shitty answer.
baseline
It's
is
gonna be a correct
faulty,
answer,
shit
but it's just
in,
not gonna be
shit
the
out.
it's not gonna be the
Exactly.
one that works. And so humans in general, we're horrible. We're horrible at measurement and assessment. I've
Yep.
even met really good data scientists who are really,
Yep.
really good at what they do. And then I turn around and I hear them talk about another subject, and I'm like, hey, you're throwing all of your principles out the window. This is like, what are you talking?
Exactly.
And I'm like sitting there, it was almost disturbing to me because I was like, how are you so good in this area? But it's just to highlight the point that we're not good at measurement and assessment. That is a very, very
No.
technical thing. And just like, back to Heisenberg said, we use what we think is important, right? I,
Precisely why I
I,
brought it up.
I
That
give
he
my
understood
dog
the weighting.
I
Yeah.
give my
Yeah.
dog, I anthropomorphize my dog and goes, oh, look at this reaction. But my dog is
Yep.
actually doing that to me, thinking of me as this guy's the head dog. He's a dog, but he's
Yep.
a different one than me, and he can walk upright. But we're seeing it through our perspective. So that's
Exactly.
part of the issue with this is we're not good at weighing those observations out. And
Yes.
if
And
and
that's where training can come in handy. So I'll give you an example of that. Let me street that up for you again, back to your language, because I think language is key now because we haven't
yeah,
had language on board as long. And so we're still, as humans, understanding the functionality of language. But what we do is try to take shortcuts, and shortcuts don't give me the granularity I need to make a better decision. So that's called context and relevance. All of this stuff comes from computers. So I'll give you an example. Nico was going someplace this weekend for his friend Cal's bachelor party before Cal gets married. Now they've been married for a couple of years, Cal and his lovely wife. But the idea is that they haven't done the legal marriage. So now they're going to do it because their second kid is forthcoming, and they want to get this out of the way. So I know all of these people that were going to be there, over 100 of them, and I knew them when they were kids, and I knew the area that they were going to, which was ripe for somebody to make the bad decision. So I even talked to Cal's mom and his stepdad on Saturday to make sure that everybody was in the right mindset, because I was a little worried about it too. So Shelly's in the other room making a phone call, and she was talking to Nico, and Nico was supposed to call and update us to say, hey, I'm fine. Nico's 33.
yeah.
You get it? But this is still things that critical thinkers do, right? And so I want to make sure he's safe. So all of a sudden I hear the words and spent all day at the clinic. And I go, shit, there was an injury. Something's going
Yeah.
wrong. Why? Because I was looking for something to happen. My bias was there was going to be an injury and poor decision making.
Right.
The idea was it was Bailey, our daughter, the daughter-in-law, the veterinarian,
Yeah.
that was at the clinic all
Clinic.
day while
Yeah.
Nico was out at this party. And she had spent longer than she wanted there. But because I only
Oh
had
yeah.
this much of a window, I
Yep.
only had a sugar cube, Brian, instead of the bowl of sugar in my own spoon. What I did is I created the explanatory storyline that I was always looking for. That's a bias.
Right.
So
Well,
if you go in with that bias, then, for
no, and
example,
I
a
hear
cop is
you,
listening right
but
now.
here you're talking about that. I hear clinic, and I think I'm waiting on a really important blood test.
Exactly, exactly. And we're all waiting on that, Brian. But the idea is a copper is going to compare the situation that is forthcoming for them based on their experience. And they shouldn't. They should tabula rasa. This is new. Yeah, I understand
Well,
that this guy looks and smells like a doper and it feels like it's going to be this decision. But if I categorize everything and try to put them into the buckets too early, the old Plinko example, the old ice cube tray, and I don't give the room for them to leak out a little bit, every situation you encounter is novel and nuanced. And they're going to say, well, no, because it's the same. It's not the same. When it comes to humans have free will. So therefore, your predictive analysis has to follow a channel, a path.
And
I'm
but
saying you coming. Go
I
ahead.
will say not as much free will as we think we do. I
No,
mean,
no, no,
meaning
no, exactly. But what I'm
you
saying
can
is,
you mean
you on
you
the
have freedom,
receiving end.
you can free to make a choice, but those
Right.
choices are going to be, there's a finite number of them, and they're going to, based on the context of the situation, you only have so many options to make.
Precisely. So
And so you
let me
can predict,
depose you
maybe
on
I'm
that.
adding the point where you can then predict what's likely going to happen next.
Exactly. But that prediction is narrow, but it's laser focused. So, Brian, you get a call on the police radio that says there's shots fired. Then you get that there's at least a suspect that's now, or a victim that's down at the scene. And you're going there, and the next day's story reads 3 cops shot, 1 dead, responding to shots fired call. Why? Because what happens with all of us, not just those cops, and I bless all cops for going into harm's way because it's dangerous. What happens is you showing up, Schrodinger's cat, changes the outcome.
Yes.
Okay. And when we
That's
think of that, Brian, now we're thinking in terms of critical decision making and not being a victim, right?
well, yeah,
So the idea is the writing is on the wall. The problem is we didn't go get a linguist and say, hey, read that to me. We assumed that because it was there on the wall, that it was the same old
and
writing we see on every wall.
well,
And
but
that's how we get
that's
in
the
a
whole
trap.
point is to back exactly what you just said. You influence the outcome of the situation, so
Every
you
time.
have options. Like, I mean,
Every time.
it's not. I mean, it's basic math. You coming into an area either increases or decreases of risk of whatever's
Yes.
going on in that area. Just you being there. It's not victim blaming or something. It's like, but you have a
No,
say in the matter. You being there. It's like you can't commit a crime unless you have a victim.
your
Yeah, you know what I'm
attendance
saying? So
alone
you're
changes the
just
outcomes.
physically being there.
Yep.
And what it is that if I look at things that way, it opens up it sort of opens up my mind to the possibility that I can influence the outcome. And if I can
Am
influence the
I
outcome, yes.
adversely
Well, then you
impacting?
get to the level, okay, wait a minute,
Right.
is
Am
this,
I the
am I
problem?
adding, am I throwing fuel on this fire, or
Exactly.
or
But
what do
isn't
we need
that
to
the
do?
most essential part of maturity? When you're talking about emotional maturity, you're saying I've administered police work with my feet and with my hands. Okay,
Yeah.
very rarely with my head. I've used my mouth a lot to talk myself out of situations. But all of these bat things on my tool belt, okay, they're wonderful. But what if I just take a step back for a second and understand my mere presence changes things? Whether I pulled up and parked in the driveway, whether I'm in a marked car or in full uniform, and the first thing that I tell everybody is, "Hey, I'm here now, so this shit's going to get fixed right now." You see what I'm talking about, and
Yeah.
I'm having fun
It,
with it. But we don't get to that till later stages in life. Now we're 17-year vet,
yeah.
right? Why don't we
That's
do that at the one
No,
year,
and
right?
because I would say even those discussions on thinking and decision making,
Yes.
I would say that promotes emotional stability.
Yes, and listen, if I'm doing that as a child, so in the context of first responders at the academy, for example, and with my support system at church or at home or wherever else I am, then I'm more likely to get that thing that we've all been looking for, which is called adaptability and resilience.
Right.
Adaptability, clearly important. Resilience comes from spending time at the cognitive gym. And folks, if you're not doing that daily, if you're not experiencing those influences daily, you're in neutral, and neutral gets you nowhere. Back to a car analogy. Put it in neutral. You can floor it, right, Brian? And it's getting you nowhere. You're
Yeah,
not moving at
yeah.
all unless you
Right.
live in San Francisco, right? And take your foot off the brake, and then you're in the ocean. But the idea is that exactly that. We're talking about your inability to separate language from the skill. And what Brian and I are talking about is rehearsing the skill, practicing the skill, and experimenting with the skill is the only way to get better, not adding the weight of additional words to try to define it. Because the definition doesn't matter because the cat's either still in the box or he's not in the box.
Yeah, yeah. It's
So
either
grab a
dead or it's
flashlight, grab
yeah.
a
We
pair
don't.
of scissors, and go look in the box,
It's either
right?
dead or alive. I don't know.
It is,
So it's one of those when you're looking at it, right?
right?
You're. I mean, you're getting into well, I guess we started with Heisenberg and talking about the father of
Exactly.
quantum mechanics here. So,
Exactly.
but the
But
physics of
look,
the
you just said
situation
it.
is yeah.
Quantum mechanics and physics, and then if we add physiology and if we add social mechanics, now we're getting to the idea. But
Yeah.
we don't do that at a police academy. The police academy isn't Athens on the steps of the Parthenon. It's I have all this information that you have to get a check in the
And you
box
got to
before
get
you
it,
get
and then
out,
you yeah.
and we only have 15 weeks to do it. Go. You get what I'm trying to
Well,
say, and
that's
that
yeah. And
includes tax law and
there's
parking
that
problems and
Well,
All of
that's
these,
the
and they're
thing is
not
that
equally weighted, Brian. They're
no,
not.
and there's nothing wrong with the way they're. There's nothing wrong with that information or that training.
No,
It's we're not using it the best way. We're not using because we're not having that discussion on the steps of the Parthenon. We're not going, well, in this,
exactly.
how do we, what about that? What about these other considerations? Remember,
Right.
first do no harm, should be the
Right. So
motto.
what
Like
does that mean?
what is the
Exactly?
overall intent here of what we're trying to accomplish, big picture?
And
Because
and
you
and
bet
the
that
feedback
influence
loop is: are we getting any closer?
and
Because if we're not, we got to change our
well,
our,
but
our mannerisms.
because every micro decision that's made
Yeah.
leads to the macro effect. That's the whole point, is
Yep.
that no, those little things are, it's always the little things. The big stuff is easy because it's easy to identify, and we get you
Absolutely. And it
we either
handles itself many
well,
of the
or
time.
we either have the resources or don't, and now we
Yep.
need to fix that big thing. And it's just these daily little things that are the most important, because like
Right.
anyone said, just like building habits or mental anything, if I don't have to, set some big lofty goal. I got to do one thing today, and then one thing the next day, and then one thing. Well, sure enough, a year
Yeah.
later, but we don't
You're
look at it that way.
You're so right. So one, I got Lyme disease. Why? Because I went to WebMD because I was having some symptoms, and it was just that I
Yeah,
was tired and had
yeah,
too much coffee. Right. But I look on there and it says two things: Lyme disease and brain cancer. And
oh
you know how
yeah,
many times have I come to you on the road and said I have brain cancer? I just looked it up.
yeah.
Okay. So that's what I'm talking about when we throw those platitudes out there. And you're right on it too. When we start saying, well, I'm suffering from
This
this syndrome, I'm suffering from this. Look, first of
I
all, identify that all of us have biases. Some are stronger than others, and get it down to one or two that are manageable, that sound an alarm in your own head where you say, hey, listen, I'm exhibiting confirmation bias because
yeah.
I'm only looking for evidence that makes me
Well,
right.
and
Simplify your life. Get
and
rid of all of those other mental models,
no,
Brian.
and I do the opposite. Oh, that's what I have. Like I do the opposite with my doctors. It's
Yeah,
like prove it. Prove to me that I have post traumatic stress, doc. I don't think so.
exactly.
Brian,
While
you
you're
have
holding a gun
Brian, you
on
have
the
a
nurse.
traumatic brain injury.
Exactly.
But prove it. I don't. So, remember when
You're
this
so
happened? What
funny.
do you talk? So, but the point is like, no, I don't have any of that. I'm good. Prove to me that I
Yeah.
have that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
That's why we make such a great pair, because I'm constantly thinking that I've got something horrible. And it's like, Brian, I've got this pain. And then you say, yeah, you don't have your right shoe on. Oh, shit, that's it.
yeah,
I mean, it's always
exactly.
something simple with me, right? Because I'm
It
so
really
busy
is.
in the moment going down and in that I'm not looking up
I've
there.
got this burning all over my legs. Greg, you just spilled
Yep.
your coffee on yourself. Oh,
Exactly.
okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So,
So
but
no, no,
look, I think that's the idea. The idea is, listen, folks, you're paying somebody to be your coach in all of this, and all that person is thrown at you is more words. I'm saying, and Brian is saying, I think, and our company is saying, listen, winnow that down to the few things
yes.
that are weighted more importantly than other things, and you'll be happy in the long run because you'll achieve your
And
outcomes. And consistently and constantly measure that baseline, because what happens is if you're not updating your baseline, then you're not having a positive or a negative feedback loop. Both are important, right? Come on,
yeah, and
it's
what are those essential things that I can do in every situation, not just this
exactly.
one single thing. Hey, when this occurs, because you hear that too. Well, let me give you another tool for your toolkit. It's like, oh my
Yeah,
God,
yeah, yeah.
Jesus. Just what if
How
I
big
can't
is yours?
if I can't use the same damn screwdriver, then
Yep.
I mean, it's
Well,
like the Toyota truck. If you have a 10 millimeter, socket wrench, you can pretty much take apart most of that vehicle. Right?
that's
They
true.
designed it that way because that's the
And
point
you
of it.
either have a manual, or you can buy a manual, or
Yeah.
you can go on YouTube, and there's 100,000 other owners that have taken that
Yep.
piece apart, and
Oh
they'll
yeah.
guide you through it step by step.
Yeah.
That's what, listen, that's the difference between education and training. So
Yes.
the education is out there, it's available to you. The training is you getting in there and busting a knuckle and saying, oh
Mhm.
man, I got to chalk my vehicle. I better have a light because it's getting later in the day and I can't see
Well,
as
that's the
well.
thing is now you
Those
just brought it
things.
up because everyone already has the answers. Now, when you go do that, Greg, and you go on YouTube and someone goes, "Hey, look, you're going to be
Yep.
tempted to do it this way, but don't, because let me tell you what happens. It's 3 extra hours of work because you get." And you're going, "Oh, okay, cool.
And
You
you're going
did
to
that."
break this
And
piece
well, here's
and
the
get it
thing.
right.
So now I get to go, "Oh, I get to learn from your mistake, so I don't do that
Exactly.
now." Now, I still make some other mistake somewhere else? Of course, I'm a
And that's
human.
the police academy. So
Oh,
if you're in the police academy and I'm sitting out on the steps of the academy, I will tell you this: are you in a relationship? Have you ever been in one? Doesn't matter who it is. I don't care if you're marrying a fucking fish. The idea is, if you've ever been in a relationship, those things were: are you mad at me? You haven't talked to me? Are we going this? Those things are going to happen the first time that you go on a domestic on the road. So those
yeah.
life experiences are also going to taint you. which means that you're going to get in there and that man, woman, or fish is going to say or do something that's going to remind you of your mom, your sister, your
Yep.
uncle,
Or
whatever. And all
bad
of a
time you
sudden,
had. Yep.
now I'm not dealing with the situation at hand. Now I'm dealing with all of those situations in my lifetime. And Brian, we don't train folks for that. You want to train your kid for? You want to train your kid for a broken heart, because it's going to kick them right in the balls or hit them right between the eyeballs. And when they're on that funk, then they're not going to be thinking clearly. So teach them a method for making decisions that'll make them feel better about themselves and have a self-worth, so they can get out of that, or they could cut themselves or commit suicide or do an act of violence. That's life. Life is about those. And because we're in much bigger groups or smaller groups now, we don't have the influences of the tribe to guide us. So that's where training comes in. We don't have training. So sometimes now, Brian, we have to go seek it out or buy it. And that's all we're talking about. This episode right now, you people that are listening to the episode, thank you
If
so
you've
much
made it
for your
this far
support.
in.
Hit like, yeah, but I'm telling you right now, this is the magic, and it's not just coming from Brian and I. It's life magic
No,
we're shining a light on that you can go and do today to make.
Well, that's
your
what I'm
life
saying
easier.
is how many people listening to this right now could have this same conversation with the people they work with
This afternoon
I bet
dinner
90%
on
of
their
the
way
people
to
that
work.
listen to this could.
Exactly.
I mean,
And
that's
so,
the thing
Brian,
too.
we're making it harder than it is.
Yes.
Interpersonal communication is actions amongst the humans in the population. Remember when they built the neutron bomb? Well, the neutron bomb will kill all the people, but it'll leave all the buildings standing. Think of the ludicrous nature of that argument, right? So the argument goes the other way. If we had nothing, okay, but we had people, could we rebuild anything? And the answer is, of course we can. So why are we trying to deconstruct things out of our control when human relationships and human encounters are things we can impact every day? Human encounters, you're having them on the phone, Brian, you're having them during text, you're having them on a Zoom, you're having them at work, at lunch, when you meet a counter person. That's where you have to improve your life. That's what's going to keep you safe and avail yourself of those opportunities that are hidden to other people.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good.
Now, what do we do?
Yeah. What were we talking
Where do we
about
go?
again?
Yeah, exactly. Something about your doctor's appointment and how it went horribly wrong.
So, no, I think that it's sort of a we kind of put a lot out there with talking about some what some of the words mean, what pattern recognition is, what situation and situational awareness mean, and critical thinking, and how language
and how they should be
important.
used.
Well,
right,
how language is important, and then within a training context, what does that mean? What does that really mean? And those conversations are where that's where the magic happens. You have to go do it, and then you go, okay, now let me tell you about this time, and you go, oh wow, that's an interesting story. Let me go try that out there today. And I mean, really, like I'll go try that out, and then you learn in the next thing. And the sharing those stories are as powerful as any other training.
So what's more powerful, reading the news or sharing those stories?
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
a simple one, right?
Yeah,
I mean, so if I'm going to spend 5 minutes of my day trying to make my life easier or better, or influence somebody else's life to make their life easier and better, it's shut off the TV and take a knee, Brian. It's sit around the table and say, hey, I want to give you the advice from old gray hair. Those are the essential lessons that we can build upon that make learning digestible and manageable, and also turn them into usable chunks, paying it forward. Simple.
Yeah, I think that's a good spot to end on. So,
and it's a Monday. We're recording this on a Monday. Brian and I don't normally do it on a Monday.
I know,
because we're so beat from the weekend, from skin popping heroin and window paint and bladder acid, and
a lot of fentanyl,
motorcycle gangs. It's a bad thing. Don't do it.
It's how I decompress from the week. So, excuse me. So
there we
go. I think that's a good spot.
That was a Freudian slip right there, buddy.
Just take a hit of something. Thanks. No, we appreciate everyone from tuning in.
Really
and again, like, if you enjoy it, just share it with your friends. Just tell someone, hey, here's this episode, check it out. This is why I like it. We're not charging anything. We do have the Patreon side, so thank you to the Patreon subscribers, where we do extra stuff. We talk about things that we don't want to talk about on here, just because it's either
secret
ongoing
tattoos,
or it's something
recipes.
That you got to keep the chuds out somehow. So just putting up a little bit of a paywall helps with that. But yeah, and if you have any questions, of course, reach out to us, leftwithgreg@gmail.com. But thank you everyone for listening and for supporting the show. And don't forget that training changes behavior.